Today, I'd like to tell you our story of modernizing our flagship website, Hexagon.com, on SitecoreAI. And so this story, like many stories, starts with our character in a bit of peril. So almost 3 years ago, we took a survey of internal stakeholders on our website, surveyed 77 stakeholders. Only one said it was really great. Trust me, the other 76 were not. It was pretty great. Here's what some of the other 76 had to say. The current website does not serve any purpose. It tries to be too many things to too many people and divisions. I have no idea. It's supposed to support all businesses and present a cohesive story, but it's a mess. The slow speed of Sitecore and how long it takes to make a simple edit. Also, the inability to make changes to certain pages without the help of corporate, which is me. From a digital marketing perspective, it currently is a black hole, meaning it isn't usable at all. And my personal favorite, it technically does bring in leads. So, like Push said, my name is George Chang. I'm the Senior Director of Digital Experience and Technology at Hexagon. I lead our UX, digital strategy, and development teams at a group marketing level. I've been working with Sitecore over the past 12 years. And I started as a developer, moved into an architect, and now I barely look at code anymore, or at least I try to keep myself from looking at the code. In addition, I've also been a Sitecore MVP for the past 10 years. I'm based out of Atlanta, Georgia in the United States. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, but I do have this rule where I have to know who you are before I accept your connection. So come introduce yourself to me, or else they probably won't accept you. All right, so that's me. I want to talk about who Hexagon is. And so Hexagon is the company I work for. Not necessarily a household name, but if you think about it, kind of everything from the phone in your pocket or the planes coming out of Heathrow, they all function because we can measure the world around us. And so at Hexagon, that measurement, the thought of measurement is part of our DNA, and that's what makes us the leader in global measurement technologies. And so we do a lot of things related to precision measurement, positioning, autonomous solutions, really to transform some of the world's most vital industries. And so the real goal of what Hexagon intends to do is to provide our customers with the confidence to build, navigate, and innovate. So we've been doing this for 25 years. We've got 25,000 employees over 50 countries, and so we cover quite a bit. It's people internally have referred it to as the biggest company that you've never heard of, which I feel like a lot of companies refer to them as the biggest company that you've never heard of, but it's got to mean for something. But okay, so in line with our story motif, once upon a time, this is where everything began. So when I joined Hexagon 5 years ago, the company was in the middle of a major digital transformation. And so not just digital transformation, but a wholesale transformation across the organization. Hexagon as a company, it's a company made up of a lot of acquisitions, but we had this problem in the market, which that all those acquisitions that we made over years and years and years, so many that there is a Wikipedia page about all the acquisitions that we've made. All these acquisitions were never really fully assimilated into the Hexagon brand. And so whatever companies that were owned by Hexagon, you didn't really know they were Hexagon. And then the company itself, even within the Hexagon realm, had a bit of a crisis of identity. People who worked in the organization didn't say, I work for Hexagon. They were very much identifying themselves by their divisions, like, oh, I work for Hexagon Agriculture, Hexagon Mining, or Hexagon Geosystems. But very, very rarely was it, I work for Hexagon, right? And because each of these divisions effectively operated as their own businesses. They had their own processes, their own platforms, their own websites. And so the CEO at the time, he wanted to shed all these identities, and he wanted, us to go to market as Hexagon. People wanted the market to know who Hexagon was. And so one of the biggest initiatives was to consolidate this whole Hexagon identity into one Hexagon identity, right? And so one of those initiatives was to bring in all these websites that have been scattered in the wind that have Hexagon logos on them, to bring them as a single digital front door for Hexagon. And so this became known as the very creatively termed Project OneWeb. And so Project OneWeb was a multi-year program to consolidate about 30 of those the biggest and most kind of the most visited websites into a single website, which is hexagon.com. We had way more than 30. I think at one point we've cataloged over 250 websites that we could find, which means there's probably a significant percentage more floating around in the internet. These are old brand sites, microsites, landing pages, some random Squarespace site that probably some guy spun up at one point and is charging to someone's corporate card somewhere that no one knows who to log into. Like it's everywhere. We found all kinds of fun stuff. A large number of the division and brand sites, the larger sites, the higher traffic sites, were already on Sitecore, but they were on Sitecore 7. So obviously, big need of an upgrade. So we took on this modernization effort to modernize the platform. And at the time, it was Sitecore 9.3 with SXA. XM Cloud was still fledgling. And so we took the approach 9.3 with SXA, thinking surely XP will live forever. We all know the story for that. But this really involved a full rebuild of all the components and page templates on the site. So it was a full-blown rebuild of everything. It was a consolidation of 30+ websites. And it was a lift and shift migration of 24,000 pages over 20 languages from these 30 some odd sites. And so we launched on the morning of October 1st in 2022. And needless to say, based on everything I just told you, it was not a riveting success. You can only imagine what that user journey looked like for someone visiting the site. You had 30 different websites that you've lifted and shifted all the content into. The idea of a user journey was a glimmer of hope at best, and the implementation was not the greatest either. A lot of problems on launch day. And so 9 months after launch, we had a new CMO come in, and we ran a survey, and the quotes at the beginning were some of the quotes coming out of that survey. And you might have thought, oh, when we were reading through them, like they must be some site that's fallen into disrepair that's been a long time. No, this was a site that lasted for 9 months. So a couple more fun facts from that survey. Over 2/3 of the respondents felt like the site needed improvement or didn't work at all. And then 90%, which is a very big percent, said that the navigation was bad. But honestly, what did you expect when you were pulling in 30 different sites with 30 different IAs and just kind of mishmash them together, right? And so kind of took stock of what all our problems were. We had a lot of them. There was no denying that was bad, but objectively it was, at the core of it, it was a content problem, right? Again, 24,000 pages of 30 sites, right? No one rewrote their content to work in this new unified structure. No one rewrote their content to be under this one Hexagon umbrella. No one looked at user journeys. Honestly, we barely knew who the users were. All we had were 30 different sites that coincidentally shared the same domain. I also suffered from what I'll call opinionitis, right? Everyone had an opinion. They're like, oh, we know our users. We know exactly what they want. And it turns out no one really knew who our users were, and no one really knew what they wanted. They just had an idea of what they wanted. There was no data, there was no strategy, there was no proof. On top of that, we made this horribly complicated relationship structure that tried to map our 900 products to 200 different capabilities that Hexagon had across 40 industries. There are Excel sheets that I don't dare to open because they probably won't open anymore, just of the sheer size of mappings that honestly, if we couldn't understand it internally as a company, there was no way we were expecting our customers to understand it as well. And so no one liked to take the blame for this, obviously, including us, right? But for a lot of the marketers in our organization, the platform became the scapegoat, right? It wasn't our content that's bad, it's because Sitecore sucks. And sure, the implementation had some issues at launch, and we fixed them all, but the biggest problem we ran into is this became a perception problem, right? It became an optics problem. People saw that the site was bad. They didn't want to invest into it. They're like, oh, the platform is bad and Sitecore is bad and we don't want to invest into this. We're going to go create our own microsites. And our 30 sites that we've consolidated down suddenly started just detangling to 30 different sites again, right? And so we needed a new strategy on how to approach this. And so this was our new strategy. We're going to blow it up, the site that we just launched a year prior, to do it right. We would do a content audit, like And it would define user archetypes, and we would define user journeys. We would do, user research and testing, like things that feel very obvious that you should do for a website, right? And so we couldn't really go to our executive team and be like, can we please give us more money because we screwed this up the first time around, right? And so we had to make it make sense for the business. And so in order to do so, it wasn't just let's rebuild the website with new content. It was, let's build something that our marketers would love, our developers would love. We need, obviously, to lower costs because money speaks when we talk about talking to finance people. And we needed the data to be able to back this up, not just, we think this is going to do this. And so for the platform, this is our new architecture. We went through a full-blown, we didn't go to Sitecore by default. We went through a full-blown vendor selection process that lasted about 3 to 6 months. And it did wind up that what the artist formerly known as Sitecore XM Cloud at the time, that really made sense for our needs based on kind of who our marketers were and how our organization was distributed and the maturity level of the organization. And so Sitecore, XM Cloud / AI was kind of what we determined as that's the platform that the marketers were going to love. And a lot of marketers kind of participated in the platform selection process, and they felt that way as well. And really, the goal was to make them self-sufficient, right? Remember that quote early on that was like, oh, we can't do anything. We need to ask corporate to do everything. That was what we were trying to avoid moving forward. We have all these marketers across the organization. We could no longer be the bottleneck, so we need to make them self-sufficient and be able to provide them the tools to do so. On top of that, right, we wanted to have a headless implementation. We wanted to modernize. We wanted to move to SaaS. This made our developers happier. Not to say that developing in MVC is not fun, but it was at the time 2024, and they were looking to greener pastures, right? And so backing it, we looked at Content Hub for asset management. We did Sitecore Search for site search. And then from the front end, we had Netlify for front end hosting, Azure Functions for business logic, and then Cloudflare for privacy and security and all that good stuff. And so you may be looking at this being like, I thought the goal was to cut costs. You got a lot of logos up there. And it turns out as many logos that were on there, we actually had, moving to SitecoreAI actually, while it increased our license spend, it lowered our overall services and infrastructure spend by quite a lot. The math is fuzzy here, but basically just from a pure services perspective, we lowered our cost by 40% annually, which is about $300,000. You bring a $300,000 savings to any CFO, their ears will perk up, right? And so this is how we came, just from a services perspective, because we didn't have a lot of Azure infrastructure to manage. We had a lot of kind of Azure infrastructure from the XP side that we're saying, hey, we no longer have to manage. We have less resources that we need to do. We don't need dedicated infrastructure teams anymore. From an implementation perspective, it was a little bit easier. It was a little bit faster. You don't need as many specialized developers anymore. Upgrade cycles were a lot less intensive. For anyone in the room who's done a Sitecore upgrade, you know that's a fun project in itself, its own Project One Web, if you will. But the biggest challenge was that because Sitecore XM Cloud, SitecoreAI was such a new platform, getting developers and people who knew a lot about the platform was a challenge, right? But as time went on, obviously more people had experience, and that changed. Now, as we talk about content, right? Again, we had 25,000 pages. Did we actually need 25,000 pages? That was the question we asked. We were like, there was a lot of pages. We knew that not a lot of them had a lot of value, and we found out that no, we didn't. And largely, this showed in some of the metrics that we saw. So we found that 2.8% of our pages, out of the 25,698 pages, that drove 80% of the traffic on the website, right? And for some of you who have looked at your metrics, it's probably a similar pattern where a tiny fraction of your traffic drives a significant majority of, or a tiny percent of your pages drives a significant majority of your traffic, right? And so we had to do a full-blown rethink of the content. We did a content audit. We scored every single page, every single one of those 25,000 pages, right? We across 34 different attributes, went through and we took the outputs of that content audit and did a content reduction exercise. We had to do this very objectively because if you ever wondered what the best way to get a marketer mad at you is to tell them that their content has no value, right? And so, and especially when there's a numerical score attached to it, they're not happy with that. So those are some fun conversations to have. But we went through it, whatever was left, the content that was getting eyeballs, that actually had some purpose, right? Those were the pages that we decided we would take and we would rewrite and we would fit into the new content strategy that we were developing for the website, a unified content strategy. And so that we would sound like one company instead of 30 for a company website. Again, feels obvious. And in case that wasn't enough work, at the same time, we decided to go through a full rebrand and visual identity update across the organization. So again, we wanted to do things right. And so instead of just saying, okay, we'll just apply the new colors and the new fonts and the new logo and everything to the website, we decided to build out a proper digital design system because it's not just our Hexagon.com site that is going to be on the web. We have dozens and dozens of sites that are going to be on the web, whether they're marketing sites or portals for some of our support or even portals for some of our software products, right? And so this was the time to bring everything together to have a unified design language. And it was intended to support the entire ecosystem, the entire enterprise, and then be able to scale with it as well. And so the intent was that Hexagon.com was going to be the first consumer of this design system. And we needed this for the design consistency and made sure, it basically used the biggest site to show that, it can be done and it will be done and that it would be easy enough to use. We also looked at, from a guiding principle perspective, this kind of goes along with everything we've talked about so far, is to be marketer first. I think a lot of times when we look at websites, where the concern is so much about the end user, the visitor experience. What do we need to do about the visitor? What do we need about, how do we get them to engage and convert and et cetera, right? Which was important. We didn't downplay that at all. But the intent was to make the marketer experience, the content author experience, a first-class experience for them as well. We wanted to make sure that our content authors were empowered to do all the work that they needed to do, but also within the proper defined guardrails so that they wouldn't do what they shouldn't. I'm a firm believer in two things when it comes to marketers. One is that marketers do not make good web designers, right? And so if you give them a blank page, chances are pretty good what comes out of it is not great, right? And two, a bad marketer experience really results in a bad visitor experience, right? Because if a marketer can't do what they need to do on the website to be able to put the content out on the website, to do their bread and butter job, to be able to do what they do, the visitor is the one that's going to suffer. And so in order to provide the best visitor experience, the thought process was, well, we need to make a really good marketer experience, right? And so practically, this meant that we tried to, and this is where during the vendor selection process that we went through early on, one of the key things that we looked into was what was the marketer experience going to look like, and how flexible is that marketer experience? And so Page Builder was a big selling point. That means because of that, a lot of the work that we're doing was to keep marketers in that Page Builder environment as much as possible, and not flipping different, having that single pane of glass where they're doing their work and not having to flip to here and there and to this, that, and the other. And at the beginning, obviously, it had its challenges of keeping, the marketer in Page Builder, but fortunately, Sitecore has been delivering a lot of stuff over the past, a lot of functionality over the past, 6 to 12 months, and that's become more and more of a reality for us. And I bet you guys were waiting to see how long we could go before talking about AI, which is 22 and a half minutes. So we definitely brought in AI to do a lot of the work. And of course, there's the standard, like, oh, we used AI to write code, which is happening. But we also wanted to bring AI into a lot of our content processes. Again, AI was, content was one of the biggest things that we tried that we struggled with all the content and the content audits. So we did use a lot of AI to do our content auditing to begin with, to kind of go through and read through things and help score things. But also, but that was kind of a point in time type of thing. We'll repeat it again for future content audits. But we wanted to start integrating AI into the day-to-day workflow of marketers. And so, again, one of the biggest challenges for our marketers was like, oh, we want to put something online, and we needed to help them. We didn't know what to write, or it was difficult for some of the marketers to be able to translate like their marketing, like content creation and translate it for the website. And so we decided to build something what we called the Hexagon Content Manager, which is basically an agent that we built in Microsoft Copilot Studio, and it's intended to use across a number of mediums. So it started with the web, but it's intended to basically get marketers out of this kind of the blank sheet of paper phase that a lot of marketers start with, the kind of the blinking cursor in Word, right? Is to get them to that first draft as quickly as possible, to be able to adhere to brand guidelines. In this case, it was to adhere to our page template layouts as well. And so, basically what we can do is we can grab a lot of assets, whether they're brochures or product white papers, or even things like recorded webinars, that it could put as many kind of assets as you can into the agent itself and provide it into the agent. And since the agent is already knows what page structures look like and page templates look like, it can take all that information, synthesize it, and then be able to present you kind of a first draft of a page. And so this agent, we've started doing some more and more testing with this right now. It's worked actually quite well. We were able to generate quite a few pages based off content. And again, like, this is useful because it wasn't the content that was on the site, on the legacy site before, right, wasn't great. Like, it was already content that had been, on the previous site that was lifted and shifted, but that content was on that site for, I don't know, 5 years before that. I mean, some of this content on the website was a decade old. It had never been updated. It wasn't good. And so this was the way to get them to update their content, right? To modernize their content and to be able to do it in a very brand compliant way. All right, so here's where we are today. We did our first phase launch in June of 2025 at our big customer conference last year in Las Vegas. It was just a small sliver. It was only 40 pages in the grand scheme of things. Since then, we've launched another 20 some odd pages with there's about 600 other pages in queue. We've gone through a full-blown content audit of all 25,000 pages, out of which we've decided there's about 2,000 English pages that we decided to keep, plus whatever language variants. So it amounts to about an 80% reduction, which is significant. The Hexagon Content Manager agent we've developed, it's currently in use in flight to generate our content. And then we've got a few more kind of page templates in active development, but basically it's, we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, which is having a site that was very focused, very straightforward, and getting the information that visitors and customers need without all the fluff and distractions and everything around it. Our proudest moment, though, is that we won a Sitecore Digital Impact Award last year at Symposium. And so this was a huge recognition for all the work that all the teams did. It was, frankly, kind of, if you rewind back to the beginning and some of the comments that were made in that survey, this was a massive turnaround. It was really a testament that we turned things around in our site, and we're really incredibly honored to have received it. Actually, let's move on, and I'll talk about a little bit more of some of this stuff. But I want to talk about what we learned, and I think it's easy to talk about the platform and be like, oh, we learned that SitecoreAI is great for marketers, and it's a massive improvement, which it is. But this is kind of a real-world scenario, and I want to talk about real-world learnings that we had, right? And so some of the things is, like, back to content, right? The idea of saying less is really difficult, right? and that people have developed an emotional attachment to content, which often kind of defies logic and data sometimes, which is a little bit crazy. And so we learned to just set the criteria and guidelines ahead of time, right? And as much, I mean, people still get mad at you for it, but at least you're coming with data and numbers, and you're not saying, well, I think your data is bad. It's because, like, based off these 38 criterion and you scored this on each of these criterion, you just didn't get a very good score, right? And kind of leads into that second point where data is usually inarguable. Some people will continue to fight sheer hard numbers, which is crazy. But you gotta do your research, you gotta bring the numbers, and you gotta make your decisions off evidence and not opinions, which is really, really difficult, because that really means you have to do your homework in order to do this, right? It's easy to say, like, oh, we know this and we know that, and we have historical anecdotes to be able to support our thing, but to bring actual hard data and numbers into things it takes a lot of kind of underlying work before you even get there. This third one is my favorite, which is progress breeds more progress. Spoke earlier about how we only launched 40 pages last year, which is out of several thousand pages, is a drop in the bucket. But as some of the people in this room were with us during that time, during that launch, even those 40 pages brought in a lot of excitement and a lot of buy-in and a lot of kind of goodwill, right? Whereas the previous site, they've kind of mentally written it off and said, we're not going to invest into this, right? It's bad, the platform's bad, et cetera, et cetera. Just showing that progress and showing kind of a small sliver of, like, hey, this is what it can be, it really drove a lot of excitement and buy-in. People coming all over the place saying, like, oh, the site is great, it looks fantastic, it's really focused, and it actually talks about what we do, and like, it's a complete 180 from the what we were told previously, right? And because of that, instead of like everyone saying we don't want to invest in the platform anymore, we're just going to go create our own site, the conversation turned into, how do we get onto the site? When can we start content migration? Which a sentence I never thought anyone would say to me, right? It was like, when can we start migrating our content to the new site? And so being able to show incremental progress really gets a lot of buy-in. I would encourage you, if you're ever undertaking something large like this, yeah, it's typically a multi-year kind of project, multi-year program, but deliver things iteratively, right? Sure, it's not going to be perfect, but it drives the excitement, it drives the buy-in. It also leads to the next one, which is perfect is the enemy of good, right? We know that phrase, perfect is the enemy of good, but you still want to keep that standard of good really high, right? You want to keep things great, because when you cut corners and things, right? I'm sure everyone in this room who has experienced a project, right, is like, oh, we'll fix this later, right? This is fine for now. This is a bug. We'll address it later. And then, if I took a survey of people in this room, I can guarantee you, not a lot of those things that we said we're going to fix later actually wound up getting fixed, right? Like, so it was important for us to maintain a high standard for the things that we could fix, that we could control over, right? And try to minimize the we'll fix laters as much as possible, knowing that later will never come. New things will always pop up. The things to fix later will always get prioritized. And then lastly, kind of back to the Sitecore side of the world, right, we really took advantage of our Sitecore resources, right? Whether that's our CSM or Sitecore support. We had 360, which was really helpful, but just having someone kind of on your side from the platform perspective, from the vendor side, right, is really, really helpful. They can get in contact with product teams, they can escalate, take advantage of those resources. They're provided to you largely as part of your buying the product, and so take advantage of them as much as you can. All right, so kind of what's next? Where do we go from here? Well, we have our design system. We want to start pulling this into the Sitecore Design Studio, so that not only do we have, from a design system perspective, for like, what's the thing called? Storybook, right? Something for for other web consumers to have, but also use the design studio to be able to have an inventory and a library of Sitecore components that marketers know how to use. Again, just another resource for them. I don't know if we want to start letting the design studio generate components based off of getting a lot of head shakes of generating new components. We'll put that in the back burner. That's a we'll fix that later kind of situation. But at least at a minimum to have a library for marketers to be able to reference for. We're also looking to put together way more agents to across the site to do whatever we need to do, including translation and validation and some of the metrics and analytics. Still a bit of in an ideation phase right now. Of course, I think we're slowly making it into the mythical phase 2 of optimization, which is exciting. So the site is actually already performing really well compared to the old site, but there's always things that we can do to make better. And lastly, we hope that we don't have to do this again for a while, definitely not 9 months later. But who knows, next year is a new year. I may be doing this talk again here next year about the same thing, about the new site that we built after this one. All right, but before we get to questions, a quick thank you to all our sponsors. Without them, we wouldn't be in this wonderful hotel. Me giving you my life story and kind of my mini work memoir for the past 18 months. And so big thank you to all our sponsors. And with that, we'll get to any questions. Ooh, that was way more than I thought that was going to be. I was expecting none.
Hi, my name is Paul. I'm from Tourism Ireland and I'm a customer of Sitecore, and I'm on XP 10.4 and looking to migrate at the moment. I've loads of questions for you, but I'll keep to just a few. When you say you have 40 pages now,
yeah,
do you still have another 2,000 on the old platform?
We do. So we launched last June with 40, and we've got more than 40 now. But we got creative, and so the old site and the new site currently live side by side. But we've updated the header and the footer for the old site to look like the new site, and then some creative network routing is happening in the background. And so you still jump from page to page, and it still feels like you're on the same site. But I mean, definitely the look and feel feels different from the old site to the new site. But this is how we're doing kind of this incremental migration because of this, right? And so as more pages come online on the new site, more pages kind of get decommissioned off the old site, and then eventually the old site will be serving no more pages, and then we can shut that down completely.
Okay, and second, I'll leave it at this. Was there any risk of you moving away from Sitecore? You mentioned in the tender that you were looking through the whole tender process, and all you're doing is like lead generation by the look of it. Maybe I'm wrong. There's probably a bit more to it, but it doesn't seem that you need a big platform there's no e-commerce, there's nothing going on there. So
yeah.
Apart from page creation, was the financial side of it that kept you on Sitecore?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was kind of was that marketer experience, right? We looked at a lot of other kind of headless platforms, a lot of kind of CAS platforms, and definitely at the time, again, to be fair, this was almost 3 years ago, so the landscape and the ecosystem has evolved a lot since then. But at the time, we were looking at the contentfuls and the content stacks and all this stuff. And from a marketing experience perspective, it just wasn't as good, right? And so, again, one of our big focuses was the marketer experience, was the content authoring experience, and being able to enable them to do the things that they needed to do. And so it wound up that of all the platforms and vendors that we evaluated, SitecoreAI had the strongest offering or XM Cloud at the time had the strongest offering from a marketer experience.
Thank you. How many components did you end up building, and how many of those were like actual marketer components, and how much are like one use technical whatever connection components?
I'd say we're closing on 70-ish. I have to do a count, but it's in that range. I would say the significant majority of them are marketer components. Yeah, we try to again, with kind of that mindset of the marketer is a first-class experience. We also try to keep abstract away a lot of the techie stuff, right? So that they're like, not like, oh, what is this? I don't know, some, random component that I could put on a page that doesn't do anything. So trying to abstract away some of that and making sure that marketers are only kind of seeing what they're seeing. And of course, the more components you get, I'm sure it's kind of what you're alluding to, is like the more complicated it gets in organization and like, what does this component do? And that's also why we want to start pulling in Design Studio, is to have that list of components to be like, here's the component that you can put on the page. Here's all the variations of that component, right? Like this is where you can use it, and put a lot of documentation and governance around the components that we have.
And just a question, how did you arrive at these 70? Were they mainly like equivalents of what you had before, or were they all coming out of the new design?
Yeah, it was all new design. So we started ground up, new designs, new everything. It was, I think our perspective on it was the optics problem of the old site was so bad, right? Like we just, it was the building blowing up. Like we just left it all behind. Like, let's start from scratch, start from the beginning, do all the proper stuff, and see kind of what actually is necessary for pages. I do want to say, I don't know the exact number, but I will say that the number of components from the old site to the new site decreased fairly significantly, like double-digit percentage-wise. Again, it's to get it more streamlined for content authors, instead of giving them every option in the world, right? To be like, you don't need 9 page headers. You can live with a lot less, right? And so kind of taking that analysis paralysis away from the marketers.
Yeah, we have plans for review.
Hi. I think seeing you talk about this, it's very similar to the position we're in as a company in terms of the negative feedback for the website and like performance and stuff like that. So one of the things, it's similar to the question over there really, but you were on Sitecore before, you stayed with Sitecore, but obviously there was a lot of negative impressions of Sitecore from the business.
Yeah.
So how do you convince those people that it was the right decision to stay with Sitecore?
It's a really good question. We looked at it as like, we were going to have to rebuild everything from scratch anyways, right? So that's why we did that vendor selection process. Bring them all in, right? Let them do the dog and pony show, right? But the important part was we involved the business as part of it, right? We're not saying we're making this decision in a vacuum. We don't want to be here saying like, we're going to make the best decision for you, and then you're not going to like it. Like, we brought them as part of the process, right? And so that way they can't come to us and be like, well, this isn't what we wanted. They were in, they helped decide, right? Did some people like other platforms? Sure. But like, I think at the end of the day, when we're looking at what's the platform that you would be most comfortable and most happy using day to day, like this is kind of where we wound up. So it was, I would say it's largely kind of coincidental that we wound up with Sitecore again, because we really took a like blowing up approach of like, let's just take every platform out there, have them kind of do their thing, right? Obviously, like, we're like, from a creative side, we're an Adobe shop. So they came in and like, the creative people are like, oh, we like Adobe. And so like, it's, a lot of conversations were had. And I think, we just brought everyone into the process and let them have a voice.
Did you redo the survey after the new website went live?
I'm sorry?
Did you redo the survey after the new website went live?
No. So not yet.
Well,
not yet. Not yet. But I mean, just from the launch, like when we launched last June, the feedback was, it was almost like, it almost felt fake on how good it was, right? And we were just waiting for someone to be like, it's awful and it's the worst thing I've ever seen. But it got a lot of good responses, which is complete 180. Even, we did that survey 9 months later, but I already knew what the output of that survey was going to sound like. Like, it was no surprise when we got the survey results. From day one of the launch, it was bad. And so, yeah, so the fact that that the feedback was overwhelmingly positive the second time around was really, really encouraging and heartening.
Yeah, thank you. Really great presentation. Thank you. I just wanted to ask about SitecoreAI Pathway. Have you used SitecoreAI Pathway? Have you considered it? Are you considering using it now for those 2,000 pages you've still got on XP? And just wondering if you could just talk a little bit through that, because we're on XP at the moment, potentially considering a migration across to SitecoreAI. And I just wondered how much does that then simplify that process? And I want to hear that from a customer rather than from Sitecore, because obviously from Sitecore you get told something that maybe isn't quite the experience that a customer might have.
Yeah, I'm going to need all the Sitecore people to close their ears for 2 minutes. Sorry, Sean, earmuffs. Yeah, so funny you bring up Sitecore AI Pathway. That was something that we actually participated in the kind of the beginnings of with the Sitecore team, because this was something that we were looking at from a content migration perspective. Again, it wasn't a lift and shift migration, so that's where it got really complex, right? It wasn't like, oh, we're taking our content from XP to Sitecore AI. It was very much a we need to rewrite this type of thing, and so it was very much not a lift and shift migration. And it was something that we've been kind of in constant contact with the Sitecore team on what that looks like in some of these use cases. And I think for Sitecore Pathway specifically, we kind of helped them with some of our use cases, and they even went through and looked at some of our stuff internally, and it just happened from a timing perspective. It didn't really work out because we needed to move, and then Pathway was still kind of coming online as we were getting ready to move. But basically, I mean, I think it's going to be I think it is and will be a really good product for a lot of use cases. So having kind of participated in that program with them, we saw a lot of it, and it wound up being more of a timing thing for us that we weren't able to use it. But I think it's probably, I mean, some of the stuff that's being done with Sitecore Pathway is very, very kind of similar and parallel with some of the stuff that we're doing with our content agent as well.
Hey George, great session.
Thanks.
So I wanted to know why Netlify and not Vercel or Azure?
Yeah, so it was between Vercel and Netlify, and back to our whole cost savings thing. That was the cost savings bit. And so just to give you an idea of hard numbers, right? I think we were spending almost $500,000 on hosting in Azure a year. That dropped, it was a full digit off at this point right now kind of moving to Netlify and everything. And at the time, Netlify just had a bet. It was right when Vercel did their whole pricing change, how they measure pricing, which I think Netlify just did last week as well. So yeah, good times. Yeah, I mean, at the time it made more sense. It was kind of a wash between the two. And again, from a cost perspective, with Netlify, we had a much more kind of controlled cost and cost expectations that we could report up and be like, oh, this is what we're expecting, to, instead of being so variable of how Vercel was at the time.
I have another question actually. So I am in a similar situation. I work with a company has a similar site as Hexagon, I think. So do you also have a problem with solar still? It's a technical question, I guess. The bucketed items, and does Sitecore Search actually help you resolve that problem?
Yeah, so the nice thing about Sitecore AI is I haven't had to think about solar for a solid 18 months, which is the best thing in the world. So Sitecore Search is just kind of, what Sitecore Search wound up replacing was, we had Coveo before for our site search, and that replaced Coveo. And so Sitecore Search today just manages the search bar at the top of the at the top, right? But we're not we are still looking to use it for some of our kind of listing pages with filters and things as well. But for the most part, right, there's still a few hairy bits that we need to work through with Sitecore Search, but for the most part, it does what it needs to do, and it's adequately replaced kind of Coveo for some of the things that we were using for Coveo. But definitely because of moving to Sitecore AI, it's asked all that solar stuff has been abstracted away, and I don't have to think about it, which is fantastic.
Good to know. Thanks.
Yes.
Thank you very much,
Yeah.
George, and for all the questions.
Yes. Thank you. you.